let's start. So this is generally how the directions will be given for a para-jumble question. This is the standard terminology that will be used. He'll say the sentence is given when properly sequenced will form a coherent paragraph. Each sentence is labeled with a letter, so try and construct a coherent paragraph from the given set. So just take quick 1 minute and solve this question, and then we will discuss. Yes, a couple of you are asking that CAT does not have answer options for these, where you'll have to fill in the blank, so you don't actually work with answer options. That is true. However, this is a general class wherein we are trying to address the entire set of competitive exams, and even for CAT, the methods that we will follow will be applicable. Even without using answer options, we'll be able to get to all of these answers. So don't worry about that. Alright, so we are starting to get a few answers in already. We will discuss how you are supposed to enter your answers as well going forward. But this being the first example, let's go ahead and see. So there are 3 sentences here. What is the sure short way of introducing the topic? You know by looking at one of these 3 sentences that this has to be the starting point. This has to be the beginning of the paragraph. It is when you are introducing this person in full. Hillary Clinton, who is US Secretary of State. You are clearly introducing the concept in the paragraph with this. So you have to start with B. Then, now let's talk about what we learned in the earlier slide about chronology of events, the time at which events are happening. You know that one thing is happening in the evening, and you know that something is happening on Monday. In the evening, she's arriving on Sunday. Sunday evening, this thing is happening, what is mentioned in C, and then on Monday, the other thing is happening. So, by going through the simple chronological order of events, we know that after B, we have C, and then finally we have A. BCA, which is option B. So we needn't have even looked at the answer options, but in competitive exams where you have answer options given already, you would see that when you know that the introduction has to be B, you would straight away eliminate C and D, and then consider only the first 2 options, of which you will get option B as the answer. Let us take one step back and ask a even more basic question. What is a paragraph? A paragraph is basically a set of sentences, but every set of sentences cannot be called a paragraph. A paragraph is a set of sentences which together will form an idea or a set of ideas. If not single idea, a set of ideas, but they will all be bound together in some way. It could be one single idea that binds them, or it could be a set of 2 or 3 ideas that will bind them. So every paragraph therefore will have a certain structure in place, a skeleton or a structure. If we can make efforts to try and understand the different kinds of structures or skeletons that a paragraph can have, then it will make our life easier when we are trying to do this kind of questions where the paragraph is jumbled and we have to put it in the correct sequence. So every paragraph is a piece of writing. Every writing will have a certain purpose with which it is written. Whether I am speaking to you now, or whether I send an email to you or write a letter to you, all of these things have a purpose behind them. So if you can understand what the purpose of the author is in a particular paragraph, that will be half the job done in terms of answering these kind of para-jumble questions. So what could be the different purposes with which an author writes a paragraph? For example, it could be something like he is trying to explain something to you. Say, for example, he is trying to explain about the demonetization that happened in India in November 16. So when he is trying to explain this, what will he do? Will he directly jump into this? No, he'll first try and explain to you what demonetization means. Then he will talk about the details of what happened in India in November 16 when Narendra Modi decided to implement demonetization. So generally in a paragraph where the author is trying to explain something to you, what he will do is he will go from general details to specific details. That means you won't directly jump into the specific details and then speak about it generally. You will first talk about the general notion and then get into the specific details of it. That is, if he's trying to explain something. But what if he's trying to raise awareness? If he's trying to raise either awareness or some bit of concern also perhaps. Say, for example, he wants you to understand why plastics usage is bad for us. So what will he do? He will start talking about a few facts and figures that will explain to us through the way of examples that using plastic is wrong. So he will probably throw 2 or 3 sentences of information, data at you, that by using or by consuming plastic we are doing these kinds of harms to the environment. Maybe under the sea, this is what is happening. In air, this is what is happening. In your own food, this is what is happening. And then eventually he will raise awareness through that, right? So depending on what the purpose of the author is, there will be different kinds of ways in which he will structure his paragraph. Say for example, he is trying to bring solution to a problem. So now what does that mean? If he is trying to bring a solution to the problem, that means that the problem is fairly well known. But still, will he directly start talking about the solution? Perhaps he will first start off by talking about the problem itself. He will explain in 1 or 2 lines what the problem is, and then he'll start talking about this is what I propose, or this is probably a good way to solve this problem, right? On the other hand, if he's trying to create some kind of suspense or some kind of surprise element in the paragraph, then all these above things will not be followed. All these rules will not be followed. If he's trying to bring a surprise element into picture, he will throw away that surprise to you in the very first instance. He will start off the paragraph with something that is so unexpected that it will catch your attention. And then in further sentences, he will go on to try and explain what he did, or he will try and explain what that surprise element actually means. So what do we understand by this? By this we understand that every paragraph will have certain purpose with which it is written by the author, and as a student who is trying to answer this kind of questions, if we can understand the purpose of that author, that is half your job done. Another thing that will come in handy is if you can understand the tone and style of the passage. While these are things, the tone and style elements will be discussed later when we are discussing reading comprehension, but just to give you an idea about what style and tone means. I told you that different people, depending on different purposes, will write in different ways. But still, one person may be very sarcastic in nature. Another person may be very humorous in nature. So how you are writing whatever you want to write is defined by tone and style. It means with what emotion is the author trying to portray all his information together to you. That is tone plus style put together. We will go in depth about what tone means separately and style means separately in an RC class later on. So if we can understand the purpose of the passage, if we can understand the tone and style of the passage, and if we have a little bit of understanding of grammar connectives 1, 2, 3, if we have a good understanding of these 3 things, then para jumbles will not be very difficult. In fact, it is one of the question types which will have a higher accuracy when compared to others in verbal ability, if you can crack the basic fundamentals. So understand the purpose, understand the tone and style in which he is written, and understand the general rules of grammar. With these 3 things, we will be able to understand how to solve para jumbles. Let's now discuss a few strategies that we can possibly think about to solve para jumbles. Identifying opening sentence or the lead sentence. Now remember that when I say strategies, that doesn't mean that all of these strategies that I list down here can be used in every case. A few of these will be applicable to each of the question sets that will be given to you. That means you'll have to always keep your eyes open for the possibility of this happening, the possibility of you being able to identify an opening sentence. Sometimes it becomes very obvious that this has to be the starting sentence. There can be no other way. This has to be the introduction. In some other cases, it may not be so obvious. So in that case, you will definitely not try and identify an opening sentence forcibly, because it may not be so obvious in a few situations. Similarly, in some cases, it may be very obvious to find the closing sentence. Sometimes the opening sentence is obvious, sometimes the closing sentence is obvious. Like we discussed in the previous slide just a while ago, opening sentence may sometimes be general in nature. If he's trying to explain something and you find a very general statement which is introducing the whole topic to you, you know that that is a good candidate for an opening sentence. Similarly, using all the given sentences, if he's coming to a particular conclusion, then you know that this is probably a good case for a closing statement or a conclusion. Sometimes I told you that a paragraph may have more than one idea as well. 2 or 3 ideas may be discussed in a single paragraph. In that case, you will know that if 2 sentences have the same idea going in both of them, then they should be tagged together. Say for example, there are 4 sentences given to you, of which B is talking about idea 1, D is talking about idea 1, A and C are talking about idea 2. Then your step 1 should be to say that, okay, B and D seem to be going together, A and C seem to be going together. Because otherwise, you can't say, I'll talk about idea 1, then I'll talk about idea 2, then again I'll talk about idea 1, then again I'll talk about idea 2. Is not a good way of forming a paragraph or forming a sentence or a group of sentences. So I will try and tie up 1 and 1s together, 2 and 2s together. So identifying sentences with same subject, this is something that can be applied for almost 80%. If I say that in half the cases you can identify, the opening sentence or the closing sentence, in almost 80 to 90% of the cases you will be able to identify the same subject. Identifying transition words. Now what do you mean by transition words? Transition is a change that is happening. So in between this 1 and this 2, there will be a transition wherein I am moving from one subject to the other subject. In that case, I will use a few transition words to say that, for example, however could be one way in which I'll do that. When I'm saying however, that means that what I'm going to speak about in the next sentence is a different idea. It's not the same idea that I'm going to say, right? So a few grammatical connectives like this or a few transition words like this will help us in identifying the correct order. Pronoun antecedents. Okay, one thing that I would like to put a disclaimer right away is, though we are talking about para-jumbles, which is part of critical reasoning today, there will always be correlations with other parts of verbal ability. Like for example, I'm going to talk about what antecedents means now. That is part of vocabulary, strictly speaking, but this is how it works. It is not like critical reasoning is a separate entity and vocabulary is a separate entity and reading comprehension is a separate entity. There will be a little bit of intersection all the time, and that is how we'll have to learn as well. So talking about antecedent, seed is one root. Earlier in the previous class, I explained to you the concept of roots, prefixes and suffixes. So here the root is seed, which means sequence or order. It means an order or a sequence. The prefix is anti. This is different from anti, anti, which is opposite. If you are an anti-national, that means you are not a nationalist. You are opposite of nationalist. But ante has a different meaning. It means before. So an antecedent is simply something that comes before the given one. In this case, we are saying we are identifying pronoun antecedents. That means, for example, if I say, if I have a sentence like, Sachin is god of cricket. That is my first sentence. My second sentence is he is the reason. He is the reason I am following the game. Here the pronoun is he. But what is the antecedent for the pronoun? It is Sachin. Only after introducing the character Sachin can I then use the pronoun he. So you will find such, again, grammar giving you good clues or hints in identifying the correlation between sentences in a para-jumble question. Identifying chronological order. What do you mean by chronology? It is time, sequence of the occurrence of events. Sequence of occurrence of events. So chronological order is simply, knowing that earlier or in 1900s this is what would happen. Today this is what is happening. In future this is what may happen. This is a chronological event of chronological way of giving information. He is first talking about what happened, then about what is happening, and then about what is going to happen. So chronological order is another way in which we can identify and solve para-jumbles. Cause and effect. Again, in a few situations, it may not be possible every time that you will have a cause and effect, but in a few situations you know that as a result of a particular statement which is C, A will definitely happen. A will happen only because C is happening before that. So that is a cause and effect. We will come across all of these in different question types in the next 1.5 hours. So don't think that this is too much of theory. Theory will constitute a very nominal amount of the time that we are going to spend. Majority of the time we will be spending in trying to solve questions and learning all of these strategies while we are solving them. Finally, after all of these things, you will also look at the answer options and try and identify ways in which you can answer the question quicker. Completely without looking at answer options, also the paraframing questions or the para-jumble questions can be solved. But it will happen much quicker if you use all the first 7 strategies along with the 8th strategy, which is using answer option. That is a smarter way. All these competitive exams give you answer options, so you will try and work out by using answer options as well. But let me give you a big disclaimer straight away. When I say use answer options, I don't mean that you keep evaluating each of these answer options in the same sequence. Say for example, A says ACBD. That doesn't mean that you will start looking at A first, then C first, then B first, then D first, and try and see if that makes sense. Then again doing the same thing with B, again doing the same thing with C, and again the same thing with D is probably the least time efficient way of going about it. So that is not what I mean by using answer options. Answer options will also give us a few hints. It will probably help us to eliminate a few options straight away. In that way, we have to be a little smart in the way we use the answer options as well. So let's start today's class with a couple of small examples, a couple of simple examples wherein the answer will be very straightforward. But for different competitive exams, you will see that the level of questions will be different. It also depends. It's also a matter of how much time you have per question. Different competitive exams have different time allotted to verbal section overall. So depending on these parameters, a few exams may have simple straightforward para-jumbles. Others may have such a case where you will end up taking 1 minute, a good 1 whole minute in just going through the question. That may not be possible in a few other competitive exams where the overall time per question that you can afford to spend is less than a minute. In such a case, you will not have such lengthy questions. But in, say for example, CAT kind of an exam, you will definitely have cases where reading the question itself will take you a good 1 minute. So we'll look at all of these different kinds of question types and see that logic will work. One of these 8 strategies can be applied to all of these different kinds of questions, be it small simple ones or the big ones, elaborate ones, all of these will fall back on the same set of strategies that we're trying to use here. So let's go through a few questions now. As we are trying to solve these questions, we will throw in a little more inputs as to how we will solve. Alright, so one word of advice here: don't just give me the answers. Don't give me the overall answer. Tell me a couple of things. Tell me that, for example, A is the introduction, or tell me that D is the conclusion, or tell me that B and C form a pair, and tell me why you think that A is an introduction, why you think D is the conclusion, or why you think B and C have to be together. So give me the answer in this terms. Don't give me the overall end answer. Give me the logic behind how you got to the answer. Tell me that this has to be the starting point, this has to be the ending point, or these two have to be together, or this has to come only after that, and so on. Good. I'm getting a few answers now. So let's start and see if you guys have got it right. Virinci has been valued at 900 crores. BCS is a leading consulting firm. This valuation has been done by BCS. They have relied on the excess value approach. So what can you say? Do you have a clear introduction here, or do you have a clear way of saying that these two have to be together? Alright, let's see then. Virinci has been valued at 900 crores. This valuation has been done by, this valuation is referring to the INR 900 crore valuation that Virinci has been given. This valuation is directly referring to this. So we know that these two have to be together. If you break the flow, if you say, for example, go with Virinci has been valued at 900 crores and then say BCS is a leading consulting firm, you have moved on to another idea. Then you can't come back to C and say this valuation, because you have moved on from idea 1 to idea 2. So what we discussed in the earlier slide about two things having the same subject should always be dealt together, two sentences. So here in this case, the valuation of 900 crores and this valuation have to be dealt with together. Then you talk about what BCS is, and they have relied. Who is they? They is again talking about BCS. So you have AC, which is a link, and BD, the second link. So the answer will be AC, BD. Alright, now let's move on to the second question, and I want the same kind of response, wherein you will tell me whether you have an introduction, whether you have a conclusion, or whether you have a set of pairs, and why you think that that is the case. Upheaval is a sudden and violent disruption. So we have a few answers already, but I would appreciate it if you guys, Samir, Rana, if you guys can give me the logic behind the answer and not the answer itself. So I think here is a case wherein you have a clear-cut case of a conclusion being identified. Out of these 4 sentences, only one sentence can be the conclusion. Forget about where every other sentence should be, but which is the clear-cut conclusion here? It is C, which is saying, but the crucial question is how and what steps can the international society lawfully take to bring an end to this crisis. So this is a forward-looking statement, right? So the other 3 are talking about the process that is currently happening. This is talking about how it can probably go on from here, is what is the crucial question. So this has to be the conclusion. Now in the answer options, there is only one case in which you have that, A, so that is your answer. But let's go through the entire set and see if it makes sense. Can you start with A, human rights have been systematically violated? No, because you don't know where you're talking about. Similarly, the death toll is nearly 10,000. Where? Again. So you can't start with A, you can't start with D. For the similar reason, you can't start with C as well, the crucial question, right? So we don't know what steps he's talking about, for what problem that he's asking for steps. So the only way of starting this entire paragraph would be with B. The Syrian government has used brute force to crush a genuine popular upheaval against the regime. Regime is rule. Rule of a kingdom, or rule in this case of a president. right? So we have the introduction, we have the conclusion, and then you're talking about brute force. What will be a good way to continue that? You're talking about quantifying that brute force and what it is doing by crushing. The death toll is 10,000. And then you get into a generic mode of human rights have been violated, which will tag along with C nicely, because there it is saying that now that the rights have been violated, let's now wait and watch what the international society can lawfully do about this case. So the answer is BDAC. Alright, so I've given a few words, meanings for you to understand the whole situation better. Arbitrary is random. Anarchy is lawless nature of a system or of a state or of a kingdom. The root word here is arc. Arc is rule. That is where you have monarch. Who is a monarch? A single ruler who rules the entire kingdom or the entire constituency. Mono is one, arc is ruler, right? So anarchy, if you replace mono with an, that means absence of a rule or absence of a ruler. Capricious is unpredictable nature. Alright, so let us try and look at the answer options to see if that will help us. We thought that looking at the answer options is one way in which we can speeden up the process, work in a more efficient way. So if you look at the answer options here, you know that B and C are the only two possible introductions. So let's look at B and C. B says nature itself is an intricate. Intricate is complex. So nature itself is an intricate system of checks and balances meant to preserve the delicate balance between various environmental factors that affect our ecology. C says in institutions also there is a need to have in place a system of checks and balances which inhibits. What is inhibit? Something that reduces. Inhibits the concentration of power in only some individuals. So when you say in institutions also, that means somewhere else as well this should have happened. And we see that in B he is introducing the topic of having checks and balances. So you know that C can only occur after B and C cannot occur before B. Therefore the first two options can be ruled out. Now let's look at the other sentences to see what should come where. Let's look at D. When human interventions alter this delicate balance, the outcomes have been seen to be disastrous. And A says group decision making, however, does not necessarily fully, so this word however is a good grammatical clue for us, does not necessarily fully guard against arbitrariness and anarchy, for individual capriciousness can get substituted by collusion of group members. Collusion is teaming up of group members. So here you're talking about delicate balance, right? So here you're talking about intricate, complex set of balances. So you can say that B and D seem to make sense. But let's also check C and A to see if that makes sense as well. In institutions also there should be a set of checks and balances to avoid or to lessen the effect of concentration of power in only some individuals. This some individuals and group decision making is a related terminology. Here you talk about individuals, there you're talking about groups. However, does not necessarily fully guard against randomness and lawlessness, because for here is used as because, right? So it's again, if you understand the various usages of a word, that will help you. This is grammatically for here can be substituted with because individual unpredictableness can be substituted by collusion of group members. So in C and A, this however link is also there. Here you're saying in C you're saying that in institutions also you should have this, but in A he's saying that however that doesn't guarantee that will be a better method, because there could be a collusion of group members happening as well. So you know that B and D will be together, C and A will be together. So the answer is D. Alright, so You remember we were discussing how sometimes they'll create a bit of suspense or a bit of surprise in the paragraph to create interest in the audience. That is a clear case that is happening here. This will be the year those anticipating a new Microsoft operating system have been waiting for. Now this will generate interest. This statement cannot happen anywhere except at the beginning. Anywhere else it will lose its zing. The very reason why it was introduced was to create that anticipation, that kind of excitement in the reader. So D has to be the starting point. Can A not be the starting point? Windows 11 is set to arrive sometime in 2018 with new functions and a new interface. It could very well be A as well. A is a possibility for an introduction. Agreed. A can be an introduction. But D can only be an introduction. It can be nothing except for an introduction. Whereas A can be an introduction. It can come in as a second sentence as well. Because it is talking about Windows 11, it happening in 2018 and with new functions and interface. Right? So A is a possible introduction, whereas D is a compulsory introduction. So D, we have D first, then we have A. So wherever you see D, you see that A is following. So DA, and then will we have CB or BC. In C, he is saying, as with the Windows Phone 8 operating system, there will be large colored tiles that also convey live information. Also, because of its mobile focus, Windows 10 will run on energy saving ARM processors. So whenever you have three sentences and you have also or say and, you would usually say A, B and C. You won't say A and B comma C. Same is the case with also as well. You would say Windows 11 is set to do this and this, then C, also because of this, this is what is going to happen. So you should have C and then finally B. B is the last one because of the word also here. Also because of its mobile focus, this is what is going to happen. So you start off with D, then you have A and C, and finally you end it with B. So if you look at the answer options, initially A could have been a possibility, B could have been a possibility, but C, could it have been a good way to introduce? Let's see. As with the Windows 8 operating system, there will be large colored tiles that also convey live information. But where is it going to happen? It is going to happen in Windows 11 is something that we know from the first sentence. So C cannot happen before A. So this could have been straight away eliminated. Alright, so let's now move on to the next question. So the answer for this question is D. The word theology can be broken down into theo, which is God or religion, and logy, which is study of. So theology is study of God or religion. Atheist comes from the same root. A is the prefix, that is negative. Theist. So someone who does not believe in God or religion is called a atheist. Alright. So out of these four sentences, once you go through them, what do you think would be the only way of introducing the topic? A is saying that these high plans. So he is referring to something that has already happened. So that can't be the introduction. In doing whatever little he could. So that can't be the introduction because he is using the word he there. C is saying the poet's huge ambitions. We'll come to that. In D, he is saying, however, not much was done in this regard either. So again, there is a precedence. Something else is there before this. So the only way of introducing the topic to us is through C. That means it's neither option B nor option D. So let's look at the poet's huge ambitions included writing a philosophic epic on the origin of the evil. What should come after this? What can come after this? In C, you're saying huge ambitions. In A, you're saying these high plans. So there is a connect there. So you have CA, but both the options have CA. These high plans died slowly but definitely and were replaced by the dream of a huge work on philosophy. Then should you have B or should you have D? Let's look at B. In doing whatever little he could of the new plan, the poet managed to write speculations on theology and political theory. And D says, however, not much was done in this regard either, with only fragments being written. So in A, you are saying that he didn't work on the epic origin of evil story that he was going to do originally. That got replaced by a dream of huge work on philosophy. And then you are continuing that by saying that in this new plan, what is this new plan? The plan that is referred to in A. In this new plan, whatever little he could do, he managed to do this and this, theology and political theory. And finally you end it with, however, nothing much was done in this as well, as only fragments were written. So D is a good way to end it. Because in D he's saying, however, not much was done. So after you say, however, not much was done, if you go back to B which says, in doing whatever little he could do, he managed to do these things. That wouldn't make sense. You're first saying that he didn't do much and then you're saying he did these things. Better would be to say he did these things. However, not much was done in that as well. Only fragments were done within this. So a good way to form this paragraph would be CA, then B, then finally D. This should be a little simpler to solve because this is a chronological way of, or it's more like a story where events are unfolding as and when they are happening. So it will be easier for you to identify what is happening first, then what, then what. It's a simple narration of events, so it should be straightforward. What is the only way in which I can start this entire paragraph? I cannot start with A, with that. I swallowed the shampoo. With that, with what? We don't know that. So we can't start with A. The man shuffled into the bag. Which man are we talking about? We don't know. So it can't start with B either. Then, while the pharmacist was rapping, you can't start with then, because that means that something else happened and then this is happening. So the only way in which you can start the entire paragraph is with D, which says, I intended to stage a sharp gastric attack, and entering an old-fashioned pharmacy, I asked for a popular shampoo mixture consisting of olive and flaked soap. So this is a good way of starting the passage or a paragraph. Then, so we strike off option C, option D. Then, can we look at A? With that, I swallowed the shampoo and obtained most realistic results on the spot. There seems to be something missing because he only asked for it, but he didn't get it yet, right? So after D, you can't have A. You only asked for it, but the person gave it or not is still something that we don't know. So we can't jump from D to A. So let's look at C. Then, while the pharmacist is someone who will be in the pharmacy, so that's alright. It's a good logical way of continuing. Then, while the pharmacist was wrapping up a 6-ounce bottle of the mixture, I groaned and inquired whether he could give me something for acute gastric cramp. Acute is severe. Acute is severe. Gastric cramp. The man shuffled away into the back regions. Which man are we talking about? The pharmacist. Now we know that we're talking about the pharmacist after C. So DC, then B. He went into the back regions to make up a prescription, and after a moment I got through on the shop telephone to the consulate, intimating my location. So this person, whoever is the narrator of this incident, he wanted to speak on the phone to his consulate and tell them about his location. That is why he has created all of this drama kind of a situation. So once he did that, once he got the job done, he swallowed the shampoo that was given to him by the pharmacist. You see that he was wrapping a bottle. So while this guy is inside the pharmacist, this guy took the shampoo, swallowed it, and obtained the most realistic results of the gastric cramp that he could possibly have come with. So the answer is D, C, then B, followed by A. Profound is deep. So it profoundly altered would mean it deeply altered the geostrategic situation in Southeast Asia. Alright, so let's look at the answer options. We have A, C, B and A as possible introduction. So let's look at the sentences themselves. 1971 war changed the political geography of the subcontinent. Despite the significance of the event, what event are we talking about? The 1971 war. That means that you can't introduce with B because he is referring to something that happened in A. The event is something that happened in A. There has been no serious book about the conflict. Surrender at Dhaka aims to fill this gap. What gap are we talking about here? The fact that despite it being a significant event, there was no serious book on it. So that is the gap that we are talking about, and this is filling the gap. So BC is a good pair that we can possibly find. Look at the last line. It also profoundly altered the geostrategic situation in Southeast Asia. What also profoundly altered? We're talking again about the war that happened. So can we say AD and then talk about BC? That will be our answer. Look at the next one. Dismal would be something that's extremely bad or poor. Apathy is having no concern for, not being bothered at all by. Sympathy and apathy both have the same root, pathos, which is feeling. Pathos is feeling. So when you're sympathizing with someone, you're feeling bad about something bad that they went through. But if you have apathy towards someone, then you are not bothered about. You're not concerned at all by what is happening. So you can see that a good vocabulary will help you in critical reasoning as well, and vice versa. Not having a good vocabulary can impact your ability to do well in para-jumbles. Alright, so what can be a good way of starting off the entire conversation? Can it be A, the potential exchanges between the officials of IBBF and the Maharashtra Bodybuilding Association has all the trappings of a drama we are accustomed to. Okay, it could possibly be an introduction if you're trying to create some bit of suspense, because that is what he is doing here. If you have to start the entire paragraph with A, then he is probably trying to create some kind of a surprise element. But let's look at the other options as well, other sentences as well. In the case of sports persons, there is room for some sympathy, but the apathy of the administrators, which has even led to sanctions from international bodies, is unpardonable. In the earlier class we discussed sanctions means ban, right? So a case in the point is a hefty penalty of US dollars 10,000 slapped on Indian Bodybuilding Federation for not fulfilling its commitment for holding the Asian Championships in Mumbai in October. So when you're saying a case in the point is a hefty penalty, that means I'm giving an example of some point. So I spoke about the point in theory first, and then I'm giving an example of saying that Indian Bodybuilding Association or Federation was slapped with a $10,000 fine. So let's look at what D says. It is a matter of deep regret and concern that the sports administrators often cause more harm to the image of the country than sportsmen and sports women do through their bad performances. This sounds like a good theory of which C is an example, a case in the point, right? So DC is one link that we can see, or we know that D has to come first. Then C also explains or introduces the fact that there is something called the Indian Bodybuilding Federation. After C, A would make sense. Before C, A wouldn't make sense. Initially we thought that A could be a good way of introducing a surprise kind of or suspenseful kind of a paragraph. But having looked at the 4 sentences, we know that we are not really talking about that kind of a discussion here. What we're talking about is something else. The crux of the matter is what is given in D. The fact that sports administrators cause harm to the image of the country. Other 3 sentences are only trying to add more value to that point. So the main point is D. So then A can't be the starting point. It has to be D, right? And then you're talking about so D, you're saying that this is what happens. Administrators cause harm than sports people. In B, he's saying in case of sports people, there is room for some sympathy. But for administrators, that is not the case, which has even led to sanctions from international bodies. A case in the point. And now, if you look at B and C together, also it makes sense, because in B, he's talking about how administrators' apathy has caused some kind of sanctions or bans. In this case, penalties. So a case in the point of C could also mean B, and that makes sense as well. So D and then A, where you're speaking in a generic way, and then C and A, which are speaking specifically about the Bodybuilding Federation of India. Right? So we also discussed how when there are 2 sentences which are having the same subject, they have to be dealt with together. So C and A are both talking about bodybuilding association, whereas D and B are both speaking in generic terms about sports people versus administrators. So DD have to be dealt with together, CA will have to be dealt with together. And a case in the point in this case is what we were discussing as one of the strategies, as this is where we will find that this is a clue that it is moving. The idea is moving from the first story to the second story, the general story to the specific story. Let's move on. So what will be the answer in this case? It will be DB, C and A. Alright, so a couple of you are saying that B should be an introduction. Let's go B. In June 1944, Germany's military position in the World War II appeared hopeless. So now you're talking about Germany's military position in World War II in June 1944, how it is hopeless. So it is very negative situation that Germany's military position is in. Does it make sense as an introduction? Let's look at the other sentences to see if it makes sense. A says, in the West, Allied forces had fought their way through southern Italy as far as Rome. C says, in Britain, the task of amassing the men and materials for the liberation of northern Europe had been completed. In D, the Red Army was poised to drive the Nazis back through Poland. And E, the situation on the Eastern Front was catastrophic, a big, huge disastrous situation, right? So if you look at the geographical map, you would know that yes, it makes sense that you're talking about Germany. In the West, there is the Allied forces through Italy. In the East, you have what do you have in the East? Through Poland, you're talking about driving. So, okay, another link that you can possibly think about here is the situation on the Eastern Front was bad. Why was it bad? Because the Red Army was poised to drive the Nazis back through Poland, which is on the east side of Germany. So you have ED as a link. You have B as the starting point. In the West, Allied forces had fought through Italy as far as Rome. And in C, you have in Britain the task of amassing men and material had been completed. So you have B, which is a definite introduction because all of them are related to Germany, right? So that much we know. So a good way to introduce the whole situation is with B. And then E and D would make sense because the situation on the Eastern Front was catastrophic. Why was it so? Because the Red Army was poised to bring the Nazis back through Poland. So B, and then you have ED. So that is your answer, B. We have another option which is similar. It says DE. Let's look at DE. The Red Army was poised to drive the Nazis back through Poland. The situation on the Eastern Front was catastrophic. You would first want to say it was bad and then explain why it was bad, rather than saying that this is what is happening, the situation was bad. You already know, if you already know D, then E is sort of redundant. There is no need of having E after D, because you already know that these guys are driving Nazis back through Poland, so it is bad. Instead, if you first introduce a topic by saying it is bad and then say this is why it is bad, that would make more sense. So ED would make sense over DE. I hope I'm clear. So who is an intruder? He's someone who is entering someone else's place without invitation. Someone who is not welcome but still is entering someone else's property is an intruder. An ally is a friend. Alright, so if you look at the entire set of sentences given here, we know that all these 5 sentences is specifically speaking only about crabs, right? So you can't start with D. We recorded 17 cases in which a resident that was fighting an intruder was joined by an immediate neighbor and ally. But if you look at the overall 5 sentences, we would know that he's talking about the crab resident, crab ally and crab intruder, right? So D is clearly not a good way to start off the whole conversation. Once you introduce that we're talking about crabs, that he's doing in B, only after that will every other sentence start to make sense, because you are now putting a context that we are now going to talk about crabs, fiddler crab, right? So start with B. Fights involving 3 male fiddler crabs have been recorded, but the status of the participants was unknown. Then we recorded 17 cases in which a resident that was fighting an intruder was joined by an immediate neighbor and ally. We therefore tracked 268 intruder males. This therefore is important. Therefore tracked 268 intruder males until we saw them fighting a resident male. When can you possibly have E? What will precede E? What will come before E? Think about it. In E he is saying we therefore tracked 268 intruder males. Why did they have to do this? Why did they have to track 268 intruder males? Because though they recorded male fiddler crabs fights, the status was unknown. The status was not known for them. That is why they tracked 268 males until they started looking at fighting, until they saw them fighting a resident male. Out of these 268, they recorded 17 cases in which a resident that was fighting an intruder was joined by an immediate neighbor and ally. The two neighbors is again referring to this. So DA. So we have a clear-cut introduction in B because that is setting the context that you're talking about crabs overall. Then it's also E is talking about why you had to look at tracking 268, because in B he's saying that the status of the participants was not known. So BE, then you have another connection which is DA, and then finally they pushed or grappled only with the intruder. Who is this they referring to? The they is referring to the two neighbors that you had earlier described. So it should be B, then E, then DA, and then C. The answer is A. Alright, so quickly running through this, we see that he's talking about alternate fuel. That is what he's talking about, right? So are there any links that you find between sentences that you can say that, alright, this should be a pair? I see one. You're talking about 30% here, and then you're saying 5 percentage points better. So can I say that E and D, which are the only two places in the entire paragraph where percentage is being spoken about, E and D should come in that specific order. First E and then D. That is one. Can you start? Alright, so if you look at the answer options, you have two of them starting with A. Can you start the paragraph with A? What is A saying? Experts such as Larry Burns, head of research at GM, reckon is they think that only such a full-hearted leap will allow the world to cope with the mass motorization that will one day come to China or India. Only such a full-hearted leap. What full-hearted leap is he talking about? A cannot be the introduction because there he is referring to something. He is saying only such a full-hearted leap will allow the world to cope with the mass motorization. So he is referring to something that already happened or was already discussed earlier. So you can't start the passage with A. That means the answer has to be, the only other way out is you start the passage with C. In theory, once all the bugs have been sorted out, fuel cells should deliver better total fuel economy than any existing engines. Let's look at B. But once hydrogen is being produced from biomass or extracted from underground coal or made from water using nuclear or renewable electricity, the way will be open for a huge reduction. This huge part is crucial here. A huge reduction in carbon emissions from the whole system. Can we not link this huge reduction in carbon emissions from the whole system to such a full-hearted leap? You're not talking about 30% or 5% more. You're talking about a huge change that will happen. So B and A are connected. A can come right after B. In B you're saying that whatever we can do with hydrogen, if hydrogen can be produced from biomass or can be extracted somehow using nuclear renewable, that will create a lot of difference because there will be a huge reduction in carbon emissions from the whole system. Now after that it will make sense to say that such a full-hearted leap, that is taking such a big jump, will allow the world to cope with the mass motorization. So BA is a link. BA is a link. Similarly ED was a link, and you start with C. The answer is A. Alright, so this is fairly straightforward. You just follow the logical sequence and you'll get the answer. One of the unsettled scientific questions in the late 18th century was the exact nature of shape of the earth. Seems like a good way to start off a paragraph, but let's look at the others as well. B says, this fact was established in the 1730s by French survey expeditions to Ecuador, near the equator, and Lapland in the Arctic, which found that around the middle of the earth, the arc was about a kilometer shorter. This fact, that means he's talking about a fact somewhere else. In C, he says the length of 1 degree arc would be less near the equatorial latitudes than at the poles. Now clearly you see that CB is a link. In C, he is given the fact, and in B, he is saying when it was found. D, while it was generally known that the earth was not a sphere, but an oblate spheroid, more curved at the equator and flatter at the poles, the question of how much more was yet to be established. So, isn't it a little continuation to A? In A, he says that one of the unsettled scientific questions was the exact nature of shape of earth. While what we knew was this is what was yet to be established. So it was generally known that it is not a sphere but an oblate spheroid, but how much more was yet to be established. So AD seems like a good way, a logical flow. Then one way of doing that, what is that talking about? To establish how much more. One way of establishing how much more is to determine the length of arc along a chosen longitude or meridian at 1 degree latitude separation. So ADE seems to make sense. And then you have C and B. So ADE CB is your answer. Alright, let's look at this now. There are a couple of ideas that are forming these 5 sentences. One is talking about stories and world, right? Reflect the world around us. So B is saying the stories we tell reflect the world around us. And in E, he's saying as soon as we capture a story, the world we were trying to capture has changed. So these two sentences have to be together. Whether it should come in the beginning or towards the end or in the middle is something that we'll discuss later. But BE certainly seems to be a link. Do we have any other link like that? Look at C and D. In C, he's saying we cannot help but retell. That means we always retell stories that we value. After all, they are never quite right for us in our right time. Never quite right for us. And even if we manage to get them quite right, isn't it a logical continuation? C and D. So C and D should be together. Even if we manage to get them quite right, they are only right for us. Other people living around us will have different reasons for telling similar stories. What is A saying? The implications of retelling of Indian stories hence takes on new meaning in a modern era. Here he is saying the implications hence. This is a good crucial word that will help you understand what this sentence is. This is a conclusion. Why is this a conclusion? Because it is taking all the facts that were discussed so far and is coming to a conclusion on the basis of those facts. The implications of retelling of Indian stories hence takes on a new meaning in a modern India. So A is a good way to complete or finish off this paragraph. We have BE together, we have CD together, we have the conclusion. The answer is D. While you're solving this, just think, if you had already known what placebo effect meant before looking at this question, solving this question would have been 10 times easier. But if you now go through this paragraph and try to understand what placebo effect is from here, you will end up taking at least half a minute more. And that is all the difference that will matter between getting a very good score and a alright kind of a score. So the more number of words you know, the better it will be overall, not just in critical reasoning, not just in vocabulary, but in all aspects of verbal ability. You being familiar with a lot of these terms across sectors. This is, for example, in the field of medicine, right? So if you knew a word like placebo earlier, it would have made your life so much easier while solving this. So the focal point of the discussion in this paragraph is revolving around something called the placebo effect. What is placebo effect? I would have actually given you the meaning of the word, but B is a definition in itself, the statement B. The placebo effect is when an individual's medical condition or pain shows signs of improvement based on a fake intervention that has been presented to them as a real one and used to be regularly dismissed by researchers as a psychological effect. So when you give a fake medicine which doesn't really have any ability on its own, but you say that alright, you take this medicine and you'll be better by tomorrow. Just the fact that a doctor gave me medicine will make me feel better the next day, even though that medicine was not really a medicine. So that is what the placebo effect means. So B is introducing the concept of placebo effect. So it's a good way to introduce the topic. But let's look at other options as well. What is C saying? C is saying the placebo effect is not solely based on believing in treatment. However, as a clinical setting in which treatments are administered is also paramount. Paramount is crucial, very, very important, paramount, right? So what is he saying here? The placebo effect is not solely dependent on believing in treatment. D says that the mind has the power to trigger biochemical changes because the individual believes that a given drug or intervention will be effective, could empower chronic patients. Chronic patients are terminally ill patients, those who are suffering with things which possibly will have no real solution, through the notion of a body's capacity for self-healing. So in D, he is saying that the mind is so powerful that if you start believing, it will actually work, sort of like self-healing. But in C, he's putting a disclaimer, he's putting a star mark there, and he's saying that it's not just about the person believing in the treatment, but also the setting, the clinical setting in which this treatment is administered. So for example, if a doctor gives that medicine to you, you will actually start believing that it's a medicine. But if your mother gives it to you, you may not believe that it's a medicine, and maybe therefore it will not work, right? So DC is a link that we have here. This has huge implications. No, let's look at E. What is E saying? Placebo effects are now studied not just as foils for real interventions, but as a potential portal into the self-healing powers of the body. Here you have self-healing, and here also you have self-healing, right? And then you have A, which is saying, what is A saying? This has huge implications for the healthcare system as it operates today, where depleted resources, depleted is reduced, diminished, and time lead to patients rotating in and out of doctors' offices oftentimes receives minimal care or concern from doctors, right? So the entire placebo effect working in appropriate conditions that are being set up, it's a huge implication for the healthcare system. So A is a good way to conclude. He's saying overall, if this is true, if this will actually work out, it will have huge implications for the overall setup of healthcare system, given that there are less number of doctors and more number of patients at any point in time. So defining the placebo effect itself is a good way to introduce. So start with B, and then in E and D you're talking about self-healing, and then in D and C you're talking about believing, and in A you're talking about the kind of effect that it will have over the entire healthcare system. So the answer is C. Dissemination is spreading knowledge. Unprecedented is something that is happening for the very first time. It doesn't have a precedent. It is the first occurrence of its kind. To accentuate something is to make it more prominent, more noticeable. Alright, so one thing that has helped our cause in this question is that we know what the introduction is. By looking at the answer options, I know that it starts with C. So let me start from there. Turning the pages of most family albums, which belong to a period well before the digital dissemination of self-created and self-curated moments and images, would reconfirm the basic instinct of documenting our presence in a particular space on a specific on a significant occasion with others who matter. Then, what can we have this after this? What is A saying? This visual turn in social media. This turn in social media. So there must be something spoken about social media earlier, after which A would make sense. Let's look at B. There's absolutely nothing new about us framing the vision of who we are or what we want, visually or otherwise, in our Facebook page, for example. That means that the theory is coming in C, and then an example of the theory is coming in B. And then Facebook is a social media, and he's talking about visual. So does CBA also make sense? Yes. Then what is D saying? We are empowered to book our faces and act as celebrities within the confinement of our respective friend list and communicate our activities, companionship and location with minimal clicks and touches. How you're able to do a lot of things with minimal clicks and touches goes logically along with easy to create, easy to share, easy to store, basically easy to do everything. So everything is now easy to do, so that you can do a lot of things with lot less number of clicks and touches. So A and D seems to be a good logical flow as well. What is E saying? What is unprecedented, that is what is happening for the first time, is not the desire to put out news feeds related to the self, but the ease with which this broadcast operation can now be executed, often provoking anticipated or unanticipated responses from beyond one's immediate location. Now this sentence is a good way to conclude, because he's saying that the fact that everything has become so easy to do will now create or may create a problem. You may have unanticipated response from beyond your location as well. Because you are able to do all of these things so quickly, so easily, things that were earlier not possible. Like for example, someone stalking you would have been 10 times more difficult earlier, before Facebook came up, than today. So that is what he's talking about here. So you first talk about how it always used to be there, this whole idea of trying to share everything that I stand for visually or however. But now what he says is, through social media it has become easier, and because it has become easier, we're doing a lot more of this activity. And finally he's concluding this on a cautious note. I wouldn't say he is warning you, but he's ending it on a cautious note by saying that now this may actually lead to anticipated or unanticipated responses, which is beyond your immediate location. So ending with E rather makes sense. So it is CBADE. A truism is an obvious truth, something that everyone in the world knows. Alright, if you look at the last line there, just as life has death as its opposite, so is tradition by default the opposite of innovation. This is the only sentence where you're talking about tradition and innovation. Everything else is talking about tradition and how you're passing it down. Handing down is passing on from one generation to another. So E is a good way to start off, because you can't have it anywhere in the middle or towards the end. You're introducing by saying that tradition is by default opposite of innovation. Now, it is now a truism to say that traditions are not handed down unchanged but are invented. That means that everyone in the world knows that traditions are not passed on from generation to generation unchanged. They are always changed. They are invented. They are not invented, but they are changed from time to time. The process of handing down. So handing down here is also there in A. The process of handing down implies not a passive transfer, but some contestation in defining what exactly is to be handed down. So here he's saying that it's not that it will just be a passive transfer from one generation to another. It will be an active transfer. What does it mean? They will choose. They'll pick and choose what needs to be handed down. What exactly is to be handed down. In C he says every generation selects what it requires from the past and makes its innovation some more than the others. And in B he's saying wherever Western scholars have worked on the Indian past, the selection is even more apparent and the inventing of a tradition much more recognizable. So there is a selection link between C and D. There is a handing down link between D and A, and E is a good starting point. The answer is A.
any subject, anywhere, any place, and on the go. Come, let us go the other way in learning. Download our revolutionary app for free AMC.